Welcome back. In this video, we're going to enable many relationships through the controller and view, and this is going to require a fair amount of work and a new concept known as data transfer objects. So let's get started with that new concept. So we're going to create a new object. This is a design pattern that's frequently used. When you have functionality where you want to be passing around information about more than one object at a time, it can frequently be useful to create something called a data transfer object to wrap those two things together into a single package. And we'll create this first. It won't be kind of immediately clear the benefits of doing this for a couple of minutes until we get into the controller, but we kind of have to do this before we can even really see how it's going to be beneficial. So in my models package, I'm going to make a sub package. So right click on models, go to new package, and I'm going to call this DTO. And in my DTO package, I'll right click and go new Java class. And I'll call this event tag DTO. So, this is a common convention. If you're making a DTO, it's common to end the class name with DTO to make that really apparent. That's what you're doing. This is a data transfer object. And if you're making a DTO that just bundles up two classes, it's also common to name it with just the compound name formed by joining those two class names. Okay, we'll add this to version control. And this will be a fairly simple class. Like I said, all it's going to do is wrap together an event object and a tag object. So let me say private event. Let me private tag. And both of these should be not null. We're going to use this class when we are with model binding and validation. So we want to put validation annotations on this. So I shouldn't be able to create an event tag object with or I shouldn't be able to, say one in the database with a null event or a null tag. There's not really a relationship between a tag and event unless there's, both objects are there. Now let's make a couple other things. Let's make a constructor. This can be an empty constructor. Actually, let's do it here. So public event tag DTO. And then let me make getters and setters for both of my fields. And that's it. So very simple class. All it does, again, is it allows us to pass around a tag and an event together in a bundle. And that'll be very useful when doing validation. Okay, so now we're ready to go into our controller. So I want to make, what I want to do is I want to be able to have a form that allows users to add a tag to an event. And so I'm going to put that in the event controller. Since we sort of, it's arguable you could create a new controller for this or put it in the tag controller, but we typically think of events as owning tags. So we will put it in the event controller. I'm going to put it at the bottom here, and I'm going to make a public string. Let me call this display add tag form. And I don't have a template for this yet, but I'm going to go ahead and make the method. In order to display this form, this will be a form that for a specific event will allow you to add a tag to it. So it's going to have a drop down with all of the available tags, and it will then have, sort of associated with it the events that we want to add it to. So I need to actually have an integer event ID. This needs to be passed in, and this is going to actually be a request param. Okay, and then I also need my model object as usual, since we're going to pass stuff. That's that's how we pass things into the view. And so when this method runs, it's going to be passed an event ID, so say 13, and then the form will be displayed, and it will basically allow us to add a tag to that event with ID 13. Okay, so first thing we need to do is actually get the event object out of this. So let's say event repository dot find by ID, and we'll pass it the event ID. And recall that this returns an optional object. Okay, and then I'm going to get the event object out of that. Event equals result dot get. Okay. Now we want to do a couple of things. We want to pass in some stuff into our view. The first thing we should do is pass in a title for our page. So model.addAttribute, title, and let's make a title specific to this event. So we'll say add tag to, and then we'll put the name. Okay, so the top will just say add event to, and it'll use the name of that event. And we're going to need a drop-down to that has a list of all the tags we want to use or that are available to be added. And so I'm going to need to get a list of tags. I think I need a repository for this. Yep, I don't have a tag repository here yet. So go back up, say private tag repository, and we'll make sure that that's auto-wired. And down below, I can go use that repository. So I'm going to add an attribute that contains a list of all the tags available. I'll call it tags, and just say tag repository dot find all. Okay, so that will pass in a parameter called tags into the template that will contain a list of all of them, and we can use that to populate our dropdown. I also need to pass into my form the event object itself. So model.addAttribute event, and that's just misspelled that. Event, and that's just going to be the event object we just fetched from the database. Okay, and so I need to do that because my form needs to know which event I'm asking it to add a tag to. And so we'll need to have both of these pieces of data established in order to, in the form, in order to have the relationship set up properly. And then finally, I can return the template name. So let's say tags add tag.html. Or actually, let's put this in the events. Yeah, we'll put it in the events folder. Okay, I don't have that template made yet. That's the next step. But this gives me a way to render the template. Great. Let's see. One more thing I need to do. I need to pass in an event DTO object. Event tag DTO, rather. And so here's where we kind of see some of the benefits of using this data transfer object. We're going to use model binding with the DTO, with this event tag guy. And that's going to allow us to, instead of trying to figure out how to pass a bunch of data around, it's data associated with a tag and an event that we want to bind together, we're going to be able to pass in a single object that can be validated, and that single object will be an instance of event tag DTO. Okay, so let's go and make our form. We'll go down to the events folder in our templates directory and say new time leaf and add tag HTML. Okay, and I'm gonna go to one of my other forms and just copy paste a couple things here. So I'm gonna get just my basic stuff. Actually, let me go to field with a form. I can grab the top of the form. Okay. Close this stuff out. Okay. So now I have a form method post. It's going to post to the same endpoint that this form this form lives at. So that's okay. We don't need to add an action parameter to the form. I'm using my fragments for the head and the header, so that'll insert the header content and the navigation bar and all that stuff. And then I've got a form here. So this form should have a couple of things. One, it's going to need a button. So let's just do that. That's the easiest thing to do. Inputs type equals submit. Let's use our bootstrap stuff. Button success, I guess. That'll make it green, I think. And let's give this a label. Value equals add tag, since that's what they'll be doing. Okay, actually, let me put that outside of the form group. And okay, so now I need a drop-down that will have a list of all of the available tags. So let me make a select, and th field equals, and this is going to be event tag DTO dot, let me go back. I'm going to go back to the controller. I want to give this a different name. Let me call this event tag. There we go. So this means the empty DTO object, which is going to be used for generating the form elements and model binding, it will be called just event tag. Okay, and here we go. So I'll call that event tag, and this is going to be, we're going to be using this drop down to specify the tag object that we want to set. So say th field equals event tag.tag, that's going to be put into the DTO. And then I need some options. So let me make an option block, and I need a bunch of stuff here. So th each, I'm going to loop over my list of tags. So I'll say tag colon tag in tags. What else do I need? I need a th colon value, and that will be the tag of the ID of the tag. And then I need th colon text, which is going to be the display of that. So I'll say that is equal to tag dot name. That's what I named that. Okay. Let's see. That should be good. So this will allow the user to, select the tag that they want to pass in. Now there's one more piece of data that I need to submit. So when I submit this form, I need to be telling the controller the event and the tag that I want to set up a relationship between. So the event itself is actually going to be predefined, because the way someone will get here is by clicking on a link that has that event ID parameter in it. So I'm going to make an input here that's hidden. So this is a way for us to it's a way for us to pass in form data on submission while not showing it to the user. And so I'm going to say event is the value here. So recall, this event object is being passed in from the controller when I render it. This is the event object specified by the event ID. So in other words, let me just be a little bit more explicit here. I think it'll make it easier to understand. So, this responds to requests at events / and actually, you know what? I don't have a mapping here, a route. So add tag is going to be the route. So this will be events / add tag !, event ID equals, say, 13. Okay, so that's the type of request that will result in this handler being called. And so when that happens, this ID will be pulled out of the request. It will fetch the event from the database with that ID. We'll pass that into the form. And then we're putting that, actually, th colon, and I need a field as well. Th colon field equals event tag that event, sorry. Okay, so we'll be putting that event as the value here of our, that needs to be an ID, the ID of that event as the value of our hidden input. So that means that when this form is submitted, model binding will attempt to create a new event tag object, which is a new event tag DTO, and it'll try to set the event fields to the event with this ID, and it'll try to set the tag field to the tag with that ID that was selected. Okay, so now let's go back and write the handler for this method. So I need a post mapping at add tag public string process add tag form. And let's see, when we get done with this, we're going to redirect them to the event details page. I'm going to need some more data before I do that. Okay. Let's see, what do I need here? I need to add some parameters. So I need, I want to use model binding, right? Recall, so let me make a model attribute, and let me make sure that is valid. And this model attribute is going to be of type event tag DTO. All right. So that will be looking for an event tag DTO object, which recall is just a simple object that has two fields. and it's going to check that it's valid. In other words, the validation annotations say that both the event and tag fields of that object should be populated. And I'm going to need a model, and I'm also going to need an errors object. Great. Okay, so I want to first, like always, check for errors. There are no errors. In other words, if I do have proper proper DTO object, I have an event and a tag both specified. I will admit here I'm being a little bit lazy about validation here, but that's because there's a lot to cover in this lesson video, and so I could do a better job of handling errors in both of these handlers, but we've covered error handling pretty well before, so you know exactly what you would need to do to handle errors. So if there are no errors, then I want to create a new relationship. And so in other words, I want to associate a tag with an event. And one way to do that is to get the tag object out of the DTO and get the event object out of the DTO, and then add the tag to the tags list. Okay, so let's do both of those things. So we'll say event equals, we will do event tag dot get event tag equals event tag dot get tag. Okay, so I have these two things now, and I want to be able to add the given tag to the events list. And so in particular, I want to say if, I want to add it twice too. So it is possible to add things multiple times, which is, or to attempt to at least, to a list you can, but we would get an error in the database. Recall in the last lesson we talked about this idea of join tables and a composite primary key, which means we can't add two records associated with the same event and the same tag. But in Java, you could have the same object in a list twice. So we want to avoid doing that explicitly. So I will say if event dot get tags dot contains, let me say if the opposite, so if not event tags that contains, and I want to check to see if it already contains the tag. So if my events list does, or my tags list from the event does not already contain the tag, then I want to add it. So we want to say event dot add tag. And now finally, since we modified this object, we need to save it again. So let me say event repository dot save the event. So just because you change a persistent object in Java code does not mean that change gets sent to the database. So you have to manually do that. You can just do that by calling save again. So Hibernate is smart enough to not create a new object when you call save. It says, it looks at the primary key and says, does this object already exist? If so, let me just update it. So this will result in an update SQL query. Okay, and let me think about that for a second. I think that's good. And so, okay, so if I have an error, I'm just going to do, again, not dealing with all the error situations as much as I could be just for the sake of brevity, but I'm just going to go back to the form. And I could put a message there, but again, you know how to do that stuff. So if I don't have an error, let me return to the details view. So this should be return, and let me say this should be a redirect too. When you have a form submission, you should always do a redirect, and I don't need that. There we go. Having a rough day today. Okay. Now I want to return a redirect to the view associated, the details view associated with this event. So let me say detail. What did I call that? Let me scroll up. It's called detail. So detail question mark event ID equals, and then I'll concatenate events.id. Get ID rather. So this will then pass me back to the details view for that specific event, and that should do the trick. So let's start out the application. We're going to do a couple more things here, but let's start it up to see if our logic works as is. So now we should be able to test going to the add tag form and with a specific event ID and selecting a tag and saving it, and we should see all that stuff get saved into the database if we did everything correctly. So let's go first. Let me actually go look. I don't have nice views set up for this yet. So let me go to the events table. So I13 is the only event I have currently. So I'm going to need to go to a specific URL for that. So we'll have to go to events.add tag. Right, and so this is just the event ID is required, which I need to add as a query param. And I'm going to have to put 13 because that's the only one I have in the database currently. So this renders a form. Our dropdown contains both of the tags that were in our database, which is good. I'm going to use my browser tools to show you the hidden input, and hopefully that looks good too. So I have a hidden input, and the value is not specified there. So let's see what we did wrong. Okay, so here's what I did. So the value field of this input element will be actually set by virtue of us putting th field here. So this would be, even though we specified that the value should be the ID of the given event, it'll actually be overridden by event tag.event. So I need to wipe this out. This isn't doing anything for me. And so the field should be set to be, the value should be set to the value of this particular object. Now, this will actually be null or empty. So that's not actually going to do us any good. So what I can do is if I go back to my event controller and instead of passing in the event directly, let me put that event, say events tag DTO, event tag equals, and let me put this, I'm going to just, what I'm basically doing is I'm going to create this on a separate line, which will allow me to set the event attribute to be the specific concrete object. And that way, when I pass it in, the th field value will be properly set. Okay, well, let's restart. Okay, so we're all running. Let's go back here. Let me refresh the page. And the only thing that should have changed is now my hidden input down here should have the correct value, which it does, value equals 13. Great. So now, when the form gets submitted, two pieces of data will be submitted with it. The value of the select will be submitted, which is going to specify which tag, and then the value of this hidden input, which is going to specify which event should be submitted. And those will both be submitted inside of this event tag DTO object, and it'll be validated to make sure that neither of those are null. So let's go ahead and try to submit this. Close the browser tools. Okay, so it redirected to the events page as we asked it to. We don't have the ability to see the tags listed. That's what we're going to do next, but I should be able to see this in the database. So let's go to the database, and we'll go to the event tags table and refresh. And now I have a new row. So this is establishing a relationship between event with ID 13 and tag with ID 15. So we do have a relationship between those two objects now. I can't view that relationship in the UI yet, but that's it exists. So now let me go back to code. I'll stop the application, and now we'll make that relationship viewable in the user interface. Okay, and so the best place to do that is in the details view. So let's go down to our detail template, and we'll add a new row, and we will call this tags. And within this, I'm going to create a bunch of, just to display all the tags. So let's see. I need to be able to loop over some tags. So let me make a span so I can loop each equals for each tag in tags. So we don't have this parameter being passed in yet, so we have to remember to go back and do that in our controller. And then for each tag, I want to show the display name. So text equals, and so this, let me show you the tag class. So when I created my tag class, I add a little method called getDisplayName, which actually returns the name of the tag with the pound in front of it. So that's kind of how a way that tags are often distinguished, in social media apps and so forth. So I'm going to use that method rather than the getName method to display. So let's say display name tag.displayName. And then furthermore, I want these to be separated by a space. So let me concatenate a single space after each tag name just so they're not sitting on top of each other. Okay, so that will render the tags if they get passed into the view. Let's make sure they're passed in. So I need to go to my display event details, and let's see. Let's model.add attributes, tags. This will be event.getTags. Oops. All right. Cool. So that should display the tags. One other thing I need to do in the UI is recall that I had to, when I made this new tag, I had to go up here and like manually type in the URL for the form. I don't want to have to do that. So let me also add a button or a link on my details view to take people to that form. So we'll go back to the details view and we'll say down below the table, we will say a href because we're going to dynamically create this based on the value of whatever we're given. So we have an event, and we need to make sure that we're generating a link with the proper event ID. So events/add tag $event ID equals, and here's where I concatenate. So I need to put single quotes around this so I can do timely concatenation. $curly's events.id. And then I need the text. Actually, the text can just be the same all the time. So the link will say add tag, and it will have a link to the form, and it'll pass in the specific ID for that event. Okay, let's start this up, and hopefully we're good. Okay, running. So now on this page, I'm just going to refresh this page. This should do two things. We should have two updates here. We should see a fourth row here that lists the tags associated with it. And there should just be one tag. I think we added Java to this one, so we'll see just one tag there. And we should also have a link that takes us to the tag form, the add tag form for the specific event. Great, so we have tags in Java, and then if I click on the add tag, that takes me to this form. Let me add another tag. Great, so cool. So we could do this ad nauseum, but now we know that it works. And you can do a lot more here. You could, for example, create a view that let you filter events by a given tag and say, show only the events that have the tag JavaScript. Doing all those types of things are all within your capability, given the skills we've covered. There's no new concepts you need to know to do things like that. So right now, this is where we're going to stop in terms of many-to-many, establishing the relationship and at the model level, and then also making sure that we can establish a new relationship between two objects via the UI. And we used the design pattern of a data transfer object to do that. So this gives you a lot of tools to work with to create many-to-many relationships.